G'day folks and welcome to the Encounters Down Under podcast. I'm your host Anthony Goodall and I invite guests to the show to share their amazing encounters with aliens and UFOs. If you or someone you know has had an encounter down under or anywhere in the world for our new segment Encounters Unbound, please get in touch with me via the Encounters Down Under Facebook page or email at australianUFOsightings@outlook.com.au. Be sure to join the Encounters Down Under Facebook page and YouTube channel where you can also get involved during the live stream interviews, sharing your thoughts and opinions during the live show. Also, if you enjoyed the podcast, don't forget to give us a rating and review on your favourite listening platform. But anyway, that's enough from me. Let's get into what you've been waiting for. Kick back and relax with your favourite beverage and enjoy the show. G'day folks and welcome to another episode of Encounters Down Under. We welcome Kim to this episode who had what most would consider a terrifying moment as a child with a possible reptilian being and witnessing many strange objects in the sky over the years. She even created an online community gosh, or gatherings over strange happenings, providing a safe environment for experiences of the unknown, as well as being the author of the Waking Wisdom books, which is available from reputable retailers. So please welcome to the show, Kim. G'day Kim, welcome to the show.
Hi Anthony, great to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you on. Thanks for joining me. Look, you've had some amazing experiences there throughout your lifetime when we were talking there, and look, you've even created your own little bit of community, as well as gone into some books as well. Can you run us through your whole life story basically, and tell us about how you got to where you are today?
I'll give it a whirl. It'll take me a while, I think, but yes, sure. Look, I always could hear voices going back to preschool, so I'm clairaudient, and I don't hear unpleasant voices. I just like to say straight off. I receive instruction more often than not. But even as a little girl, I would hear voices calling my name quite often. And I guess I'll start off, I used to have, as a really tiny child, a recurring dream of something big and green like a crocodile watching me and waiting to get me was what I felt like. So it was a recurring nightmare of mine as a child. And it wasn't until I was about 11 or 12 that kind of made sense. I was playing with a friend in a paddock near my family home, and my friend was down the bottom of the paddock. It was a steep paddock, very steep, and very enclosed. It had a creek down the bottom, and I'd climbed up to around the halfway mark. And I was, as kids do, I was in my own little world, wandering along up, slowly going upwards, when I suddenly was aware that I was looking at a leg straight ahead of me, no more than about 2 meters away. It was quite close. And even though it was close, I was staring at its knee level. And I just came to a stop to stare at this knee, which had some sort of boot on it that went over the knee. And the boot was the same colour. Everything on it was the same colour. We'll start off right here. It was green. And I sort of slowly worked up my way, up the body that I was looking at. I sort of looked at the thigh, and there was no clothing, I don't think, on the thigh. But what was really stand out was that the muscle development. And we're talking about a little girl, I'm 65, so this was in the late 1960s. So I hadn't sort of seen bodybuilders on mountains of steroids, but that's what this looked like. And I just kept slowly looking up. I don't remember much about the lower trunk area, other than it was clothed in something close fitting. And I became aware of the arms hanging next to the trunk, and that the right hand held some longish object that I didn't know, and the hand fitted into the end of that object. Otherwise, the arms were bare and, again, extremely muscular. And I got up to the chest level, and I just sort of stopped there because I wasn't even sure if there was a covering or if this was skin or what it was. I had never seen anything like what was on this chest, or this chest was. I've never known the difference. So it just stalled me. And my brain actually stalled. There was nothing that it could find as a comparison. So it took me a minute, and I gave a mental shrug and kept looking up. And I remember there was little or no neck, and a thin slash for a mouth, and nothing much for a nose. The nostrils, I can remember thinking the nostrils weren't quite right somehow. And then I got to the eyes, and we just locked eyes because he had bright orange oval-shaped irises that had diamond-shaped black pupils. And time actually stopped. It just stood still in and around me. There was nothing but me and these incredible eyes that I was looking at. And when our eyes met, the creature that I was looking at realised I could see it. And I was flooded with information telepathically. There weren't any words, just complete concepts. And it was as horrified that I had seen it as I was. It had thought itself invisible. And it was for it and me a terrible mistake, apparently. It had simply been watching two children play. The first thing it put in there, though, was that it wouldn't hurt me, that it wasn't going to hurt me, that it had just been watching us play. And so the overall feeling after that was one of shock. You know, both of us were a bit poleaxed by it, I think. And I can't have been staring at it for very long before, like a switch, I suddenly became aware of the voice of my friend, and she was still chatting some distance from me. And I can remember I slowly turned my head to see her, you know, to sort of to see if she could see this incredible thing too. And when I looked back, it had disappeared entirely. She hadn't seen it. She said she had, but I knew she hadn't, because nobody would have kept talking and walking if they'd seen it. And looking back, I worked out, even allowing for the very steep slope of the paddock, it had to be about 7 foot tall at least. It was huge. And, you know, it was actually quite beautiful. And so I had never heard of reptilian aliens, and I didn't hear about them until, gosh, a long, long, long time later. I'd told close friends about this. And so at some stage I thought, well, that's a reptilian alien that I'd come across as a child, and it wasn't part of my family's history. My family believed me. I was always known as a very truthful child, and they knew I'd seen something. They just didn't know what. I can remember my father suggesting it was a yowie, and I was like, no hair. I found out what yowies look like, because that had to be researched too. So the closest thing was a reptilian alien, and really I've kept that definition until the last couple of years, when I have actually changed what I think I came across. I'll leave that for a bit later in our discussion, perhaps. Look, over the next decade or so, I'd visit that paddock, and I could always sense when it was there and when it wasn't. And it was obvious to me that it had a way of being there. And I think that there's always been in my head an understanding that there's an entry point to another dimension in that area where I met it. I don't think I thought about it much as a child. It's just I knew it came and it went, and that somehow it could get there without a ship, I think, is probably what I was thinking. I think that once, even though I'd had unusual things prior to that, a few psychic things, the clairaudience stuff, instructions from adult voices. Oh, one of my favourites was being a little girl and playing with coloured pieces of paper in the bathroom, coloured squares of paper, and without me touching them, they would suddenly all shift around really, really fast, and a different colour would be on top of the pile, and it was delightful. I was thoroughly entertained, and I stopped and I thought, I'll go and tell my mum to come and watch this. And at that point, a totally adult voice said to me, if you do that, it won't happen. And so I stayed and watched it for a bit longer, and then I couldn't resist because I adored my mum and I thought she'd love it. And I went and got mum, of course, and she came back, and as I'd been told, it certainly did not happen. And I got my first talk about the nature of hallucination, and she didn't know about the voice, just the papers moving. So that's when I learned sometimes you have to be quiet about the wonderful things that happen to you. But yeah, I'm not very quiet anymore, I'm afraid. But yeah, I think that seeing that creature created what's called ontological shock. and it makes you examine your worldview, all the beliefs you have. So I was also at that age where your brain literally physically starts to hardwire things in and jettisons a lot of magical thinking for children. So for me, magical thinking didn't get jettisoned, I guess would be the best thing. And it didn't get jettisoned because I'd had proof that magic existed. And I continued on throughout life. I have seen multiple, UFOs of the sort that are high in the sky and very fast moving, which is personally thrilling, but not much to share in that sense. I've had one really good one with my husband. We lived in the high country, and we went for I think it was a hot night. We went for a walk around midnight, and there were these lights coming up from the river, which was again the road. Was quite a drop down to the river, and lighting up the cliffs at the other side of the road. And as we got closer, I could just feel it just wasn't right. And I said, and he was sort of hurrying, and I said, no, slow down. And as I felt that, obviously it was felt back, that I was aware that they were there, that something was there. And this is so hard to describe. And so many things along these lines are, because we don't have vocabulary for it. But the lights began to move back down towards the river, and the light didn't behave how light as you and I would normally know it. It was as though somebody was reeling it in like it was on a fishing line, so that the light was contained somehow, and it didn't diffuse out into the surroundings. It just slowly came back. It was extraordinary. And then something shot up from the riverside and literally came to just a momentary halt for me. I saw something there for just a moment before it then took off up into the sky at a rate of knots that we were both just mind blown. And the interesting thing for me is you wonder after a while how much you get to think about some things, because we never went the next day to check out beside the river where that happened. And it intrigues me that we didn't, in retrospect. Was there some sort of command that we weren't to, that we aren't even aware of? And I'll say that because I've also got a great UFO story which happened later in life. I would have been in my late teens, I think. And when I was around 40 odd, I was out with my family, and Mum, and we were talking about the X-Files, and actually my sister, they were talking about, me having seen something strange in the paddock when I was a kid, and joking about the X-Files and did I have any little marks, which I do actually, but we won't go there yet. And my mother just leant across the table to me and she said, do you remember coming home and telling me about the UFO hanging right over your head? And I started to say no when in my mind I saw it. And she and I both said together, everything underneath it was turning around and around, and there was a bright orange rim. And it flooded back. And talk about a shock, because I spent the rest of the day just thinking, how could somebody who's had so many unusual experiences have totally, completely and utterly forgotten something like a UFO hanging right over her head? My next memory of that, from the point of looking up and it was there, it was silent, everything underneath was turning, when there were like metal flanges that went back to a middle point, and then the whole thing was rimmed with an orange light. The orange light was going clockwise and the other was going anti-clockwise, one or the other, but they were going in different directions. And the next thing I remember is being halfway up the hill to home. And I can remember going into the kitchen and telling Mum, and then I think I went and had a sleep. And that's it. I don't remember it. I didn't remember it again. We never talked about it from that day till when I was 40. And I've wondered whether Mum had the beginnings of dementia. And I have wondered whether in some way that process in her brain of dementia had unlocked a portion that somehow had got shut down, that we weren't allowed to talk about this and we weren't allowed to remember it.
Yeah.
It's intrigued me whether it was because she had dementia she was able to remember it. So yeah, that's my missing time one, and I reckon there's an hour or two missing there from when I saw it and when I kind of was back on the way up the hill, just walking.
Yeah, I was
up
about to
the
ask that, seeing if how much time difference was between.
Yeah, I think it's around the 2 hour mark. I worked out. Yeah,
Wow,
because
that's
she.
incredible.
Yeah, so that was a good one.
Just before we go and continue, I'm just gonna just let everyone know that you do have Kim has a bit of construction going around, so that beeping noise you're hearing in the background there is not your stereo or anything that's going on. So just to let you know, there is construction there. You've got some machines working there with the reverse beepers going off.
Yeah,
So yeah,
and it's not EVP or IVP stuff or anything along those lines. No, it's just Dan Murphy's being built next door.
that's convenient. Oh, that's good. Can't complain with the Dan Murphy's right next to you.
It'll be a busy place, that's for sure.
It will. I'm sure I get the weekly visit there from you guys, no doubt.
Oh no, my husband's teetotaler and I very rarely drink, so no.
Oh, okay, can't make use of that then. Oh well.
No, we won't. It's funny.
Oh, bugger. That's all good.
Yeah.
So look, with the reptilians there, like obviously like reptilians aren't very often spoken of these days, and it's not something you very get many people who have these kind of experiences there. Like, was that like obviously we haven't gone all through your experiences yet, but like that's did you have like another occurrence of them throughout history with the reptilians?
With reptilians, I like I said, I was connected to that creature. I think that's how I can understand. Well, I could go a bit further and how I could understand when it was there and not there, and how I can understand was because it opened this psychic link. And it also means I can feel into any ship that I do see, what the intent is there, whether it's, pleasant or not pleasant, I think.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. That feeds into the famous Kelly Carl case.
Yep.
Yeah, which we actually had an experience in the same area earlier in the same night that happened.
Oh,
to
wow.
her. Yeah.
Because her case is quite scary when going through that story.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? With the big red eye stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and then just suddenly just in front of them, like you're like just instant, like straight in front of them, like. Yeah, that's horrible. Scary.
Yeah, really scary stuff. And how do you put this? Even though something can be quite terrifying, it's only because it's often not because it's actually a threat. It's simply that we've got no frame of reference for it. This is what I mean by ontological shock. I know I can remember she said something about she was quite religious. She'd had a religious upbringing or something. So she went straight for demonic because of the red eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily mean that's demonic. Do you follow?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's like you see an animal in the nighttime, like with the eyes reflecting back on light. That's nothing to say they're demonic. It's just the way their eyes are.
The way that's right. Yeah, and my late father-in-law who had an eye injury. You take any photo of him, one eye was red.
Well, in that case too, like every time we use a flash on the camera, everyone's got demonic eyes.
yeah, exactly. But you can see how it's something that's way out of left field. It's a fear response. Fear.
That's right.
Is part of it, yeah.
And I suppose too, like as humans, like we fear what we don't understand.
Yes, exactly, and we're trained to fear what we don't understand. So, yes, that's exactly the response we have, unfortunately. Yeah. So, where are we going to go with that next? When I remembered that UFO thing, it really bothered me. It really deeply concerned me that I couldn't remember it, and then suddenly the whole thing was back, and I had a nightmare about it that night after it wasn't a nightmare, but it was a fairly unpleasant dream where I was taken by two men in a car in this dream and up to a house. I can remember going down the driveway and it almost did a U-turn to go back up the hill in a slightly different direction, and a pond at the bottom of this drive. It was so clear, all of it. And I was taken there. There was another woman there, and the house was just covered in blood. Some woman had died in there, and we were there to clean up all the blood. And we did. And then I walked out onto the veranda. So this is a dream, the night that I remembered the UFO over my head. I walked out onto the veranda in the dream to have a cup of tea when we'd finished cleaning. And a UFO, this was again on a hill, and a UFO rose up from the ground and got to above my head. And a voice in the dream said to me, "That's the height at which they lose control." And I thought, wow, that's amazing. That woke me up. Anyway, in the end, I went to see a counsellor about it because, and this was so funny. He'd been helping my husband with anxiety, and I went to see him, and I kind of went in there and I said, "Listen, do you believe in aliens and UFOs? Because if you don't, there's really no point in me being here. This all really happened." And he then proceeded to tell me how he'd grown up in a UFO community on the coast in New South Wales.
Oh, that's
and that
interesting.
I'll say, and in actual fact, his wife had left him. He didn't tell me that then. He told me later on that his first wife had actually left him. She thought he was an alien.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I went home. Yeah, exactly. But this guy, it was so weird. I went there with this huge problem and I listened to all the stuff he said, and I was having trouble believing him. And somewhere in that time space, in that interview with him, I just started to think, oh, you are an alien, right? Anyway, I went home and I said to my husband, I think you're seeing an alien. I reckon alien. And being my husband, the next time he went in, he said, "My wife reckons you're an alien." "Are you?" "Do you know?" The guy didn't say yes or no. He said along the lines of maybe. I mean, who answers that like that? Now I get it. A stream of non-ordinary events throughout a lifetime does, in a sense, make you alien to the rest of society. So I understood why he couldn't do the yes or the no thing, because literally his world was so broadened by his life that he didn't fit the normal human parameters. He was telling me once about standing on St Kilda Beach in Melbourne with a couple of friends, and 3 UFOs came up out of the sea and went over the crowded beach, and they were the only 3 people who saw them. People just don't look, and they look away. And yeah, he was a fascinating man.
That's interesting. So, going on this guy, did he have children with his wife at all, or like?
I have no idea at all, and I don't know where he is now, and I don't have his permission to use his name, so
Yeah,
I
that's
wouldn't.
okay.
Yeah, but I know he's not there. He doesn't practice there anymore, so I don't know what happened to him. But he was interesting, that's for sure, and very heavily involved, which you find, I think, with a lot of long-term experiences, in trying to help people in some way, psychologically in his case. And he's the one who told me that when the Reptilian had to open the link into my brain, which it had to do because it's got this terrified child standing in front of it, and that it created a link that stayed open. In other words, it opened my third eye to a certain degree, and there's no closing that sort of thing, which is how he explained it to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, fair enough. So, where's this UFO community, if you mind me asking, if you can remember?
No, he just told me it was on the coast in New South Wales.
Bugger. I want to know this place. I want to find out where this place is.
Yeah, well, you and me both. I mean, if I could go back in time, I would certainly have asked a lot more questions. And that's one of the interesting things I find about all these phenomena. You think of questions afterwards quite often than when it's happening. When it's happening, you're just too involved in the moment to... I'm sure there'd be people who'd be much smarter than me who would think of a whole ream of questions, or would think that they would think of it. But really, you're just caught up in assimilating it and listening to it.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Without,
like when people are like going, "Oh, I should have taken a photo," but you don't think
mm,
of taking a photo or a video. Like, not that they give you the opportunity, but
yeah, you
you're
just
so
don't.
in the moment.
That's exactly right, Anthony. You're just in the moment and you don't think of it, and then you go, "Damn, why didn't I do that?" Yeah.
That's
So that's a
intriguing.
couple of. Yeah, yes, isn't it? Yes, even on its own. And the fact that, that's the person I went to for help with this, and he was like, and he wasn't much help. He just said to me, well, at some level, you gave them permission. And I found that a fascinating thing too.
Yes, that's a touching one. That one there, because like going through my bit of history on the research on this sort of stuff. People
Mm,
like to talk about, like, I call it a blood contract, where it's like, a bit of family involvement and stuff like that. And where at this point do they agree that they and the family get involved in this? Like, where does that point come into it? Like, and they don't remember doing any sort of agreements or anything like that. And people say, "Oh,
mm,
you're in a contract. You're in an agreement with them. You can end the contract or agreement." It's like, well, how do you know even agree to it to begin with? So
yeah, yeah, yes. And that is what he implied, that I had agreed to all of this. It's a fascinating concept in itself, isn't it?
yeah,
That you agree to something. And I at the time I was just peeved because I thought, well, I don't remember agreeing to it. And I just felt like my whole life had been fiddled with, which, is a real sense of outrage and abuse in
yeah,
having your memory wiped.
absolutely. Because people
Yeah.
have also mentioned too, like, before you are even born, you're in that spiritual sort of essence, I suppose, if you want to call it that.
Mm.
And that's where
Yep.
you've agreed that you're going to be a part of this whole project.
Yes. Yes.
So
And that's true. And nowadays that actually makes real sense to me. So if we were to look at, say, I can remember John Mack on a YouTube, Professor John Mack, and I'm sure everybody knows him as of your listeners, a Harvard psychiatrist who got into a lot of trouble for pretty much. Well, he started off trying to debunk people like us, like me, and then he said, well, actually, something is happening to these people. So fascinating guy. In one of his YouTube talks, he mentions that he was hearing more and more about reptilians, and that many long-term abductees become interested in shamanism. This I found fascinating when I first came across it, because I personally wasn't interested in shamanism, but I virtually didn't have a choice. I always describe this as I was dragged kicking and screaming into a 4-year shamanistic apprenticeship in my 50s. And I'm so glad I did it. And I am a shamanic practitioner. So nowadays, so the two tend to go hand in hand. And as I said, even I wasn't even interested. Like he was saying, a lot of them were interested. I wasn't, because I'd been a follower of a chap who was very anti any sort of dogma or ceremony or ritual stuff, that you can just go straight to the source, which I believe you can, and you didn't need all of that. And I was so anti this. In the end, I did agree to do this. I had terrible pressure from what I just call spirit, I don't know what other people want to call it, to do this course. And I agreed and I started, and I was there for the first 6 months. I did nothing in my head other than go, I don't know why I'm doing this. This isn't what I wanted to do. Why am I being literally made to do this? And in the end, I had a dream of the chap that I'd followed, who said, you don't need all of this. And in the dream, he said, he was working, he's a healing people, he was a healer in life. He was in a healing clinic in the dream world. And he said, come on, we'll go in the car and get a cup of coffee. And I hopped in the car with him in the dream world. And he looked at me and he said, the reason you needed to know you didn't need these things is so you would use them correctly. In other words, they're tools. You don't want to end up idolising the tool, the shamanistic tool of ritual or drumming or whatever. You don't idolise the tool. You're using them to focus your intent literally on creating a better world and greater harmony. So don't get lost glorifying the messenger and not
and missed the message, was what he was saying. So after that, I relaxed and had a thoroughly good time for the next few years, and still enjoy my shamanistic side, which in the end brings me back to my reptilian friend, right? Now, a couple of years ago, I came across a book on Facebook called A Step Away from Paradise by Thomas K. Shaw, and it was about a Tibetan Lama's journey to find the Forbidden Land. Now, most cultures, believe it or not, have got some form of Shangri-La hidden away in their shamanic traditions. You know, this promised land, this fabulous land, the Garden of Eden, whatever you want to call it. There's a number of different names for it. And that it's, you know, an accessible place if you know how. And so this was a book about a Tibetan Lama in the last century, not all that long ago. I think it was in the 50s, before 50s maybe, I'm not sure, who led several hundred people on a journey to open the door to go into this land. And it was in that book that I learnt about nagas. Now, nagas are serpent-like creatures that they can appear as a snake. You know, you have the famous, the one that sat over Buddha, sheltered him. They can appear as half human, half snake, and they can appear as fully humanoid. And they feature strongly in the original Bon teachings of Tibet and have been incorporated into Buddhism itself. So nagas, and also in Hinduism. And if you look at most cultures, once again, you've got reptiles of some sort in the creation theory. And that's when I thought, oh, that's why my experience is different to other people with this creature. Reptilian's really the wrong word. What I meant was a naga. They hang out in they're the protectors of waterways, so near creeks and springs. Well, this was where I met a naga in my childhood, was near a creek and a spring, both. It would explain why it was always around, or often around, because that was its home, would be my interpretation. And it could travel between my solid matter and its world. And as a little girl, I'd say it had watched me many times, hence the recurring nightmare of something big and green watching me. It was in fact this amazing creature. And nagas can, if they take a shine to you, be quite beneficial. And I think that many of the wisdom teachings that I received as a child were probably a result of that particular entity being present in my surroundings. Any questions?
Yeah, no, look, it's interesting when you like mention like reptilians and nagas. Like, I know nagas from my gaming side of things, so
Yeah.
I've got a bit of an idea what they are. But, the way you describe them is perfect, from how I perceive them. But it also makes you wonder too, like how can you perceive something like this where others can't? It. Excuse me. Like I'm not sure if you've heard the term tetrachromacy.
Tetrachromacy. Something to do with colour.
It is.
Yeah.
Tetrachromacy. It's people. I've had to do a bit of research on this, and thanks to Jamie Nielsen, who contacted me in regards to this, because I've been asking questions like how can people see things but others can't, and so obviously coming to seeing like you can see the reptilian there, but your friend couldn't. You know, it sort of makes me think like that you might have like some sort of form of tetrachromacy where it's a condition where a person has like a cone shape in their eyes. They can see different textures of colors. So I'm not going to try and go through the whole thing here to try and explain it because I can't. I'm horrible at explaining things. But basically, you're seeing colors differently to how a normal person perceives it. You're basically getting the opposite side of a person who is colorblind in that sense, because men can't get it; they don't have this condition. Whereas I think if they do have this sort of condition, that's where they are colorblind. So you're getting like the opposite effect of that. That's how I'm sort of thinking of it. So I could be wrong on this, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating hypothesis. Yes.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this is where I'm thinking, because I've been also noticing too, like a lot women are seem to be the benefactor when it comes to this sort of thing. When it comes to seeing odd objects, beings such as like being able to see things more better than what a male can. Uh,
Yes, I think so too, and I think that's part of our place. It's one of the feminine attributes, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
for me, equality never meant the same as, it always meant of equal value, when you turn masculine and feminine. So, yeah, that would make sense to me. I would think that it is a feminine sort of thing to a large degree.
yeah, I
And
sort
so,
of feel like, and
and
a
men,
lot of researchers have found this as well. Like women seem to be a lot on the larger aspect of seeing these things, where they can, even when it comes to regards to paranormal or spiritual
yeah,
senses, like women seem to be a lot more attuned to something that more than men can.
yeah, yeah. Look, it does make sense to me, because I think if you were again going to go into a lot of cultural stuff, that's the female role. It's the wisdom role, isn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, which is where the whole thing in the end took me, because I think what happened as a child when I, had that ontological shock and had to examine everything was I really became aware that what society taught about what was real wasn't necessarily true. And that made me really thirsty to understand what was true, what was wise, for want of a better word. So it becomes like a lifelong hunt, that the phenomena and the different phenomena, whilst they're fascinating, are just the catalyst for, well, I mean, you can call it spiritual expansion or just a wisdom expansion. And just looking for, if spiritual offends some people, which it does, look at it as looking for truth and wisdom about reality and the nature of consciousness and the nature of light, and life. And that's what happens. You become really fascinated with it all, and it brings you to this stage of understanding that it really is just the one life itself. We don't even know what life is, and it's the one life in all life. And if we could begin to comprehend that as a society, it's an opening for a lot greater compassion and kindness in the world. So to me, I think one of the films said it, that I've forgotten the name of the film, damn. But it said that people who are different, in essence, I've forgotten the word they use, aren't the problem in society, they're the answer. And I really can understand that, because when you're talking long term, you're not somebody who's just had that momentary experience a week ago sort of thing. But when you're talking long term and multiple stuff, you just start to think about what's behind it all and how to make this a better kind of world.
yeah. And that's the biggest struggle of it all, trying to figure out how to even do that. Like, there's so much power in the world that sort of stamps you down to even try and begin to try and open up the world into a kind of society, to even bring open to the spiritual side of things. The sense of control, where governments want to try and not go into a political thing, but governments rule the world in their way, and we've, even as growing up, we've been shunned and stamped down in spiritual beliefs. Churches are a big fault of that,
Yep.
stemming up the unnatural. Well, it's natural, but to them, it's an unnatural form of spirituality. Because
Yes.
throughout history, there, like as we are talking about shamanism and all sorts of stuff, we had priests and all sorts of stuff throughout history from villages. Like like you're talking about, like the Aztecs, the Egyptians, they had their sort of their priests and their shamans and whatnot, and they were connected into a spiritual realm, well and truly beyond what we can perceive today. And trying to
Yeah.
get that understanding back is hard,
Mm.
because we're being so stamped out on modern society.
Yes. Yeah, it really is. And neurodivergent, yes, divergence, that was the term they used in that movie, divergence, the problem, they're the answer. Yes. Yeah, but I realised that no matter how much she's scorned, and look, you reach an age, like I said, I'm 65, I don't actually care anymore what people think. I'm determined to talk about these things that happen across all societies and throughout history. I'm not going to be quiet about having led what's considered an unusual life, because it literally is, the end game of it is to make this world a better world. And we're just so controlled by fear, aren't we? We're told, we're just told who we have to be frightened of and why we have to be frightened of them, and therefore we ought to really kill them. And we're all different. We're always being told we're different. Even we don't even have modern language for the understanding of oneness. We literally don't. We have to keep going connected. And I think that's a real trick, because if you're connected, you're implying multiple or two or multiple things that are all got something in common. You're not actually talking about that you're the one thing, with infinite diversity, of course. So we're just so controlled by fear that at some point you just have to go, you know what, I think it's just time I talked about all this stuff and where it takes you, and that its end path generally is to talk about peace and kindness and compassion, and that we're not different, we're the same. And I don't need to be frightened of everybody else on the planet. And I need to find out ways to feed some of them who haven't got food, and I need to actually really care about that. And yeah, it comes back to that, doesn't it? And which links in with a lot of different spiritually transformative experiences, such as near-death experiences, are renowned for coming back and changing their whole lives, and being much more community-minded. So if the outcomes of non-ordinary experiences are positive in terms of looking after others, then it's time to just stop being frightened of talking about it. I think there's so much evidence. Like, anybody who's doubting this, who's listening, you ought to look up the Bigelow Institute of Consciousness, who did last year he did a competition for the greatest proof of survival of consciousness after death. And just the evidence gathered in all those essays, they're free. They're just on the internet. You can go to the Institute and you can look them up and read everybody's submission, all the prize-winning submissions to that particular competition. And really, there's enough evidence throughout history and then happening again today to prove that consciousness itself and individual consciousness as part of the whole oneness is the diversity of individuated consciousness survives. It survives all sorts of transformations. I think it was Mark Twain who said that no amount of evidence, though, will ever persuade an idiot. And I think that that's the take we're going to have to start putting, that people who won't look at the evidence, who just have already decided none of this can possibly happen and therefore I don't need to look at the evidence because only stupid people believe it anyway, they're actually the idiots, not us.
Yeah. That's a big thing too. Like, obviously people have got their own perception how they want to perceive the world and that, and they've obviously got their own ignorance on the whole matter, and that's part of the growing up too. Like, we're taught to perceive the world as it is today. Everything that we see is it. And thinking out that, like going through the past several decades, there's been that stigma attached to the whole UFO paranormal aspect of things, and everyone's been classed as a crazy person. So of course, that's how we've been perceived growing up. Going, don't talk about that. Don't talk about these people. Because they're the crazy people who are against the norm. The normal thing is just going to work every day, doing your family. Just everything that we perceive as normal is the normal.
Yes.
Anything that questions above that is you're going to be classed as a crazy person. And obviously we're getting away from that, but still, that's how it's been.
It's still there, and there's still a large element, although it is slowly changing, isn't it?
It is.
There's a lot of scientists who suffer from science. And as a doctor I was talking to recently said, it's also, doctors can't, and scientists can't talk about some of their own non-ordinary experiences because it might affect their funding and
that's right.
Things like that, So we're just ruled by, actually we've been put into a system across the planet. It wouldn't matter which country you were talking about here or what particular system.
we have been put in a position where we have to put in charge of us the worst of us, the shallowest.
Yeah. It takes away
Yeah.
all the credibility of your nature, basically.
Yes, it does. Yes, it
Which
does.
is,
And
it's a shame.
stop. It's a shame, and it has to stop, and it can only stop if more and more people talk about perhaps the outcomes, the spiritual outcomes of transformative experiences.
Yeah. And you mentioned before Bigelow. Like, for those who don't know Bigelow, it's Bob Bigelow, who's the big guy who's he bought out Skinwalker Ranch there and did a bit of research there. He's also got the space exploration going on there. I think he sold Skinwalker Ranch, but he did a lot there. We didn't get too much out of that, I don't think.
A lot of stuff happened. Yeah, a lot of stuff happened, but there was nothing. He's very bent on stuff that he can prove.
Yeah.
Very focused on it. There's this concept now that we have to bring science on board to make the non-ordinary legitimate. In other words.
Yeah.
And with Skinwalker Ranch, he says himself, lots of stuff happened, but there was nothing that they could. They didn't have any control over it. They couldn't put laboratory experiments into it. There's nothing they did could measure and explain what was happening. And that's what throws a lot of, people, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Because I'm big on, evidence is proof. I'm big on that. And I feel like, okay, look, I can talk to hundreds of people about their experiences of that. And it's like, that's great. Okay, look, I'm not judging you on your experiences there, but the fact is, you can't prove that you had that experience. This is where the problem is.
And, of course it is.
And of course, when people go, oh, look, I took a photo of this or something, I took an image of this, and unfortunately, you can see a little bit of blop of light in the camera.
Yes.
There's no evidence to say what you saw was it. That. It gives
right.
no credibility to your experiences, and it's not saying what you saw wasn't genuine or whatever, but it's just the evidence that you're providing doesn't give that extra bit of credibility to your story. So when someone tells me a straight story, without the evidence of a camera or photo, I believe them more instead of seeing a photo, because a photo you can sort of judge it more, and you can sort of go, well, it doesn't prove anything to what you saw, so I'm sorry, I can't believe you because of your photo. I'm probably explaining that really badly, but yeah, I'm sure you get the gist of what I'm trying to say.
Oh, I totally do, and it's one of the huge frustrations of the non-ordinary is that you haven't got that type of proof. I mean, some mediums do, very digital stuff. There are some near-death experiences where there is, again, absolute concrete proof. It's why I recommended reading all the answers to his competition, the prize winners, because there is so much proof, which is what he wanted, of the survival of consciousness. So it is there. I think I would add, and what his this year his challenge is, interestingly enough, and I would add that proof can be spiritual in nature or wisdom in nature. What he's looking for this year is ways of talking with non-incarnate intelligence in terms of wisdom acquisition. And for me, like I say, that's the end line of it. All the experience stuff is fascinating, fabulous, and I love it. And, I don't want to ever not be in awe of how magical the universe is. And I think one of my favourite quotes is, with the believing and not believing, it's that believing and not believing is a process of ignorance. Just keep an open mind, just keep an open mind. But for me, evidence can be actual change in somebody's approach in terms of whether they just start using more heart energy than not. They become kinder as a result of something.
Yeah.
More compassion in the world. So that's evidence of something having transformed that person from being who they were into somebody more interested in compassion and kindness.
Yeah, unfortunately, some people have to go and get to that point in their life where they have to experience something so traumatic or something to change their perception of life. And that's the unfortunate part. And it's like, well, how can we sort of break away from that? So people don't have to go and experience that sort of point to go and further their compassion in life itself.
Yeah. I don't know. I do think there is a small study, and it'd probably be interesting to do a bigger study in this. There's a small study that suggested that people who listen to a lot of near-death experiences in the end started to have similar outcomes to the experiencer themselves, and that is that they became less interested in material things, more interested in their community and how to serve their community. So some of they changed their lives as a result of listening to the experience. So I think that's a bit of a beacon. We tell ourselves we have to experience something to have a change, but maybe if we listen enough to people who have experienced something, it will give us room for our own growth in some way.
Yeah. So the other thing is too, like we were talking before, like the stigma that's attached to all this too. Like people aren't going to believe these people, or they're going to think they're whack jobs. Like, how can you sort of convince these people, like of those who are entirely skeptical? I hate the word skeptical, but it's like, how can you convince these people who just don't want to perceive anything of that sort of perception of life, or that I'm trying to think how I'm going with this. Yeah, like, how can you convince these people to go and actually even to think to even look into that? Like, because we're so.
But I think you have to accept that there are people who are never going to, in this incarnation anyway, look into that. The skeptics skeptic's the wrong word, because skeptic is open-minded. But people who suffer from, that fundamentalist approach to it,
Should we call them the idiots?
Yeah, well, I'd love to. I really would. It's not a very compassionate term, is it? But really, I mean, if you won't examine evidence, and there's so much of it, it's just sad. It's sad. It's sad that there are people who can't bear to confront a less shallow existence than the one that they're having, which is mind-boggling, really, isn't it? It's another way of mind-boggling for me. They find my stuff mind-boggling, and I get called crazy. But seriously, I find it mind-boggling that you can't look at evidence. I shouldn't use names, should I? But like Brian Cox is one for me. I just look at him and think, how can somebody so intelligent be so stupid?
That's the other thing too. Like, when you look at it, like the world perceived, like we take a lot of pride in our scientists and people who, like, in that higher regard of society, who are trying to do all the researches of things in the world and whatnot. And yet all this intelligence going to waste where they can't see the evidence in front of them about, UFOs, abductions, all that sort of, like, even paranormal. And yet they'll have the scientific mind, like, okay, yeah, sure, we can't prove what they are, but how can so many people around the world be having these same similar experiences there to ignore that?
I know, because they condemn them as being stupid and easily misled, hallucinating. They can't bear to look, can they? The real thing there is that they're being confronted with something that they wouldn't want to be real, because they wouldn't know how to deal with it. And I guess at that point you just become a bit sorry for them.
Yeah, because even then, like, not everyone's crazy, not everyone's on drugs or hallucinating.
No.
Like, these are everyday people who are normal day, everyday people. They're experiencing something if they're lucky enough.
Right.
It's like, but yet they still get ignored. And obviously, that's the reason why we're sort of like reaching out to people to try and break the stigma and make people realize that, like, hey, there is things happening around here that need to be given some attention to sort of try and help bring reality of what is actually out there.
What's there, and the possibilities inherent. Well, this is, again, if we go back to Robert Bigelow, what he wants to know is ways of talking and getting wisdom from these energies that help humanity in the next few decades, which led me to think that he thinks we're in very deep trouble on this planet. And I think we are too. I really do. And I think that the answers lie, to a certain degree, in people who've had spiritually transformative experiences. And that's a great way to look at them. And then you'll get somebody who doesn't like the word spiritually. So wisdomly transformative experiences, just truth. People who've learnt that there is a much deeper truth to our existence and to consciousness and its possibilities. than we've been led to believe. And they don't want us to believe any of that, do they? The people in power. And I know that sounds like a real, conspiracy theorist thing, and I'm really not. But the way the world is structured, it is around the material and about money and being kept in a mind frame of lack. And
Yeah.
it's a big jail in a sense.
Well, it is. Like, you look at the way Australia's going now, like, we'll just come out of a, world pandemic, or if you want to, I'm not going to go and talk about COVID,
No.
because COVID was it's a bit of a no-go zone with YouTube and that when it comes on YouTube. They don't like talking about COVID,
Yes.
let's be honest.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stay away from that. But yeah, obviously we're in the pandemic of COVID, and
Yep.
everyone was struggling. Australia, or the world in particular, everyone was struggling, like, because we were all got shut down and hide in your houses and all sorts of stuff. And then as soon as COVID started, like, we started getting on the better end of COVID, and yet all the prices hiked up. The reality of living just got harder once again after everyone's just been struggling for the last 3 years, or it was 3 years we went for COVID.
Yeah, it has been.
And it's like, well, how can you just do that? Like, everyone's on their last legs trying to survive, trying to get through life and without the pressures of life dragging them down. Yet they go and throw us deeper into the hole there to try and get back up onto the other hole. Like, it's like, why keep digging us deeper where we can't get back out?
I know. My husband says it's just harvest time for the banks, which it is. It's harvest time for the banks. It's happened before, and that's what's happening here. And I think to think it's not constructed in that manner would be perhaps not smart. It's designed for the banks to make a profit, isn't it?
Yeah. And then they're like, obviously, because all life's problems is hitting everyone down there, that draws everyone away from what's actually happening in reality. Like,
yes, it does. It keeps us focused on that, doesn't it, Anthony?
It does.
It really keeps us focused on the lack in our lives and having to just survive, to find the money to pay the bills, to pay the mortgage, to eat. If you're a pensioner, it's just all designed to keep us very focused on basic survival wherever we are.
Yeah, and then that draws away the attention from people like people who are like us, we're open to the whole concept of what's actually out there. It keeps those people who might be interested or curious, their attention away from the reality of, they could be potentially seeing UFOs flying around, but because their mind is so focused on everyday living, they're missing all these little signs of reality that's actually out there. That's what I'm trying to get at.
They are. Yeah, totally. I could give you a great synchronicity here that is going in the direction we're talking. So a couple of days ago, I was walking around and I came across a bee on the pavement who was obviously in the process of dying, and I very carefully moved said bee up into a tree so it didn't get squished on the pavement. And then a bit later in the day, I came across another bee dead on the pavement, and then I came across one dead outside my front door on the pavement. And at the time, I just thought, this is really strange to see 3 bees in this condition in a day. I wonder if they've been spraying locally. And then I didn't think about it anymore, right? And then this morning before our talk, I was reading a book I'm into at the moment called, hang on, I've got to get the right name for this book because it's quite good, Deep Weird. Isn't that a fabulous title? I don't know if you've heard of it, Deep Weird, and it said it's Varieties of High Strangeness Experiences, edited by Jack Hunter, and it was about synchronicity, okay? And I was reading it, and the television was on in the background, and while I was reading it about synchronicity, I suddenly thought of these bees for no real reason, right? I just suddenly thought of these bees, and I thought, well, that was very synchronistic finding 3 of them, but what does it actually mean? Okay, and then I stopped reading and turned around to listen to the news, and immediately they came on and they were interviewing a woman in Melbourne who's collecting donations for the victims of the earthquake in Turkey and Syria, and she's collecting, sleeping bags and blankets in particular because people are freezing there, and doing a great job and totally enthusiastic, and was complimenting us on how many compassionate citizens we have because she's being overwhelmed with donations of
new blankets and sleeping bags, and has a great many to send. And then I realised that the man was calling her B, and that on her blouse she had a very large B brooch pinned over her heart. And before we and I were talking any of this weird, I thought, well, there's my answer. You know, the way we're being at the moment is killing us. That we're dying off. And then there's this beautiful woman, and she's got a B over her heart, right? And I thought, so if my being becomes heart-centered, then we will thrive. We will do well.
Yeah, it's a great thing what people are doing. Like, obviously, that's another thing too. Like, when you think about it, like, well, there's got to be a lot of tragedy for people to sort of come together.
Mm.
And I'm not trying to take away from what people are doing, like, in that time, you know, but it does sort of seem that way, like, you know, for there to be a harmony in the world, for some sort of peace, you know, there has to be some sort of giant cataclysm or something that's
But it's
drawing people
lovely
together.
proof.
But it's still lovely, yeah.
Yeah, it's lovely proof though that that's still available. That and to me that was the whole point of that. You know, the dead bees and the lady named B and her bee brooch. And I just thought, yeah, you know, what are we being? You know, so shamanically you're trained. I see all that as a shaman, right? I pick up a bee that's dying and move it. But I see the synchronicity, and then it's your job to make sense of that synchronicity for you, which is what I did by realising, well, you know, the way the world's being, and it has been for the last, you know, decades, well, 100, 200 years, a couple of hundred years, anyway, a long time, is not a way that's going to lead us forward in a healthy state. No. And that we need to return to heart energy. Heart's got to rule over money in the end, doesn't it? Yeah.
And which I think it does in a lot of sense too. Like, because like a lot of people are coming together to sort of help out with this lady who's obviously organising it. So there are a lot of compassionate people out there that are willing to go and give up. Like, even though they could be struggling themselves, you know, they are willing to go and sacrifice their own, their money, or, you know, something that they can give that they might have needed themselves. You know, that's the greatest part of sacrifice. So, like, it is amazing. Like, there's still that sort of concept in the world, but like I was saying before, like, not trying to take away from what people are potentially doing, but it just seems that there's some sort of tragic event that sort of draws people together, which is, I think, it's a horrible way of looking at it.
It is, and that's really what we have to relearn, isn't it? To do it just as part of everyday life, to help someone, and just to realise that how little it takes. I think, you know, you can change somebody's whole day by smiling at them.
Yeah,
it doesn't take, you know, it doesn't cost you anything to be just kind. You know, we were talking about this in one of my groups actually, about just you know, smiling at people, helping somebody lift something down from a shelf in the supermarket, all that sort of stuff actually impacts. And because it's a spreading thing, because people realise, oh, other people do care, and then they themselves feel that they've got permission to care more too.
Yeah, that's the thing. We just got to get that compassion back for human lives, or even just life in general. We get compassion back about for the world itself. Like, I know everyone needs to survive, and we all want our wonderful, glorious things that we want to achieve and all sorts of stuff. But, you know, we still need to have that compassion about life itself.
Yeah, we really do, because that's all in the end we are. And again, you look to near-death experiences, which, you know, almost invariably will have that life review situation, and where you're judging yourself, and what you're judging really is how kind you've been, you know, what you've done, how it's affected others, and even people you haven't met in some cases in that scenario. You know, it isn't about how much money you had in the back end, and it isn't about whether, no one that I've heard of ever mentions being asked about their university degree or what their profession was. Anything along those lines. It's really gets down to the nitty-gritty of how much have we cared or allowed ourselves to show that caring.
Yeah, it all really depends on, like, the person you are as is. Like, titles don't mean anything. As long as you're that person that is showing that sort of compassion, you can be kind or whatever. It doesn't matter who you are. It's just as long as you're a kind person to everyone else.
That's right. Yeah, totally. It is really, really matters. And it's that old thing about, you know, the greatest thing that you can give the world is your own enlightenment. And that's true. And it might be you mightn't realise it until you're not here, just what a difference it makes to work on who you are and what you can change about your own beliefs, for instance, about how to behave in the world. Just
Yeah.
work on you.
Yeah, and whatever you can bring to the world as well. That's the
Yep.
thing too. So
Yep.
tell us about your group that you've got. You've mentioned that
Oh.
you've run a bit of a group and you've done some books as well.
I
You wrote
have.
some stuff there. Tell us
Yes.
about that.
Yeah, sure. Gosh, I wrote a book ages. I wrote 2 books that aren't available anymore, actually, a long time ago. Just before I started the shamanism course, I was told by Spirit to write down all the things that I could remember that had happened in my life, or as many as I could manage anyway. And I thought, all right, I'll do that. So I wrote a little book called Strange Tales of an Ordinary Life, which isn't available now, but I occasionally share the things from that in a blog on my website. But I didn't understand why, and that was because once I started the shamanism course the next year, which I didn't know about at that stage, things just really ramped up. Yeah, my life really ramped up. It was already fairly entertaining, but it got a lot more entertaining and has remained that way. So there's that, and I think I wrote a book called The Dragon Whisperer's Guide to Love, and I consider myself a dragon whisperer, if you think of Nagas. But the most recent ones have been a trilogy called Waking Wisdom, is the name of the trilogy. The first one is What the Cat Saw. There's book 2 is We Are One, and book 3 is Little Pearls and Little Gems. So the first 2 books are really about presenting my credentials in a shamanic sense, and in the sense that we're talking about today as neurodiversity, all the unusual things that have happened to me. And they're my credentials for the wisdom work that I share in Little Pearls and Little Gems, the third book, which is really just full of things that I've heard from Spirit about life in general, in many, so it's full of blessings and prayers and just spiritual sentences and I am teachings and oneness teachings. It's just what I download pretty much whenever I go for a walk. It just floods in and I write it down. Sometimes it appears in dreams. So that's, you can, and I have a blog on that page too. So the website is www.wakingwisdombooks.com, and that'll take you to the website and you can buy the books there. Yes, please do. And read the blog, which I must get on with. And yeah, I also run a weekly group. One week it's discussing dreams. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners probably don't know, but in some languages in the world, shaman and dreamer are pretty much the same sort of word. If you're a shaman and you're not a dreamer as well, I don't really know how it works. But so yeah, once a fortnight, we discuss dreams. And pardon me. And the alternate week is actually a few years ago. I was quite ill, and I was I'd had a mastectomy, and I was undergoing chemo and for that. And Spirit said to me, "We want you to start Gosh." And I went, "Oh, okay. What is that?"
Yeah, I'm wondering what it is myself.
Yeah, exactly. They know I love a good acronym, right? And it sort of snapped back at me, Gatherings Over Strange Happenings.
Ah.
Yeah. And I thought, isn't that a great name for it? So, yeah. So I have a Gosh group once a fortnight on Zoom. So they're both on Zoom platforms and they're global. And I've got just a small group. They're small groups, but we're close. It's like a family now, and new people are welcome. Yeah, and it's great. Once a fortnight, we talk about anything and everything that happens in the history of man. Really, yeah, just amazing things that have happened in people's lives. And I think one of the things that has really I've enjoyed from having facilitated that group is that over time, people who sort of didn't really think they had any experiences themselves now are regularly sharing experiences. And I guess this goes back to our point of like, how do you have this happen? You talk about it and you give people permission to experience it. without being called crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that it's quite good. I love my Gosh group, and I'm glad I started it.
Yeah, that's wonderful what you're doing. That's awesome. I might have to go and get in there one day and have a bit of listen to people's experiences, because I love listening to the strange
Yeah,
happenings, as you've called it. So
yeah,
that's awesome. That's wonderful. And I'll put a link in the description of the show there, so people can find where you are, and if they want to get in contact with you and all sorts of stuff, and
yeah,
let people go and follow their own paths. Really.
yeah. They can get in touch with me, and I'll let them know the details of how to be on the Zoom groups. And the other thing I've done just recently is I got involved with Michael Nay of Beyond Being Human, and I've done a few interviews with them, and one for the Conscious Awakening Network, which I think I've done two for that. One of them's not up yet, and the other one is. So there's one there on our shamanic consciousness. That's on beyondbeinghuman.org. You can have a look up there too. Some really interesting stuff happening there.
That's awesome. Well, look, I don't think we've covered everything that you've experienced throughout your life yet, so we might have to go and get you back on at some point if you're happy to come back on.
Yeah, sure. Love to. Yeah. There's so much that you can talk about in the weird and wonderful world.
Isn't there? It's just a never-ending wormhole, isn't it? It's like you think you're going down
Yeah.
one path here and thinking, oh yeah, I might get something here, or like a bit of an answers, and then just
Yeah.
you find something that's going to take you down a completely different path, and you're like, oh, geez, all right, now I got to follow down this one here, and then follow down here, and you just never
Yeah, I
get the
know.
answers that you want.
I know, but you keep going, and you keep broadening who you are and what you're capable of in the end, because of beliefs. What you believe creates your reality. It creates your perception of reality. So, as one of my contacts said to me, the less you believe, the more you experience. And that's true. The less you believe or disbelieve, because they're the same things. If you don't believe something, you're not going to experience it either. And if you believe one thing can't exist because of another, then you're not going to experience it. So the less you believe, the more you can experience. We forget that beliefs are just hypotheses about how things work. They're not the truth.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Like, people get told what to believe, and so obviously, yeah,
Yeah.
like you're saying, like, they're going to lose that perception of anything else that is possible.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
that's what I was mentioning before. Like, that's where I hate churches. Like, I'm not going against people who want to have a religious view on things,
Yeah.
but for me personally, I feel like the modern day religions stamped away all that because of the belief. We've got to believe in God, believe in Jesus, but
Yeah.
then took away everything that we were possible to even believe for our own selves. Our own concept
Yes.
of our lives, basically. And that's where I'm against that sort of thing. So anyway.
Yeah. Look, I know some really open-minded Christians that might help you there, but it's just that it's such an orchestrated way about what you can believe, and I think what I don't like is it doesn't encourage people to have their own personal relationship with the all that is. It's
That's
always
right.
putting an authority between you and it, and there is no such authority necessary.
Well,
It just gets in the way.
yeah. So the thing is, I'm sort of on the mindset now. Like, we're talking to a lot of people there who've sort of dived down this whole thing in regards to religion as well. And okay, obviously, if you go through history of religion, they all
Yep.
pretty much mold into the same person or the same beliefs, roughly. They've obviously just
Yep.
changed names and different bit of stories here to go and change the events or whatever, like to their own agendas.
Yes.
But yet, when you look at a belief of a god system or something like it doesn't matter who it is or who you want to call it. The universe itself is its own god, because we believe in the universe. The universe has its own power, and so instead of saying God or Jesus or Allah or anything of that nature, it just say the universe. It's its own power force, basically. So
Yes.
it's however you want to perceive your god.
Yes.
It's just that in our ages of society, we put a term to it, a picture to it, basically, and a name, so we know what we're all talking about. But then they also warped it to their own agendas for a sense of control. Whereas if you don't care about the control side of things, and sure, churches have done their own good things, but they've also done really bad things. But if you look past all that sort of stuff there and just believe in a God's self, basically, the universe is you. Believe in yourself, your own universe. You are in control of your universe in that sort of nature. If it makes sense.
It totally does. Yeah, that's another thing that was said to me. You know, which I really love is you were made by perfection, of perfection, in perfection, meaning that you are the universe. It's exactly what it means, and it's perfect. And we're told we're not. Of course, that's one of the things about religion. People really, really are repelled by the thought of being told they're perfect. They lead backwards. They're so indoctrinated that you can't be perfect. But what you are is perfect, and what's covering that perfection are the sins, separation-induced nonsense, really. Great acronym for sin. So we believe we're separate from Source. We can't be. We are it. It created us. We're made of it. And therefore, what we're really doing is not learning how to be perfect, but how to uncover that perfection that already exists within us.
Yeah. And once we get that, we can probably find that we get a perfect harmony and peaceful world, basically. You know, once we find all that. But
yes, but we've got to do it one at a time, don't we? We'll have to hope for the 100th monkey thing. You know, if enough of us are doing it and making that our intention and our focus to discover that and to unfurl it, eventually it'll reach a tipping point where everybody will go, hey, those guys have got something together there. Perhaps I better have a look at that. Have a look at me.
And hopefully we'll get there one day. Hopefully. Probably not in this lifetime, but we'll eventually get there.
Eventually, yes, because it's probably what we actually are. I mean, from the point of perfection, it's probably just unfurling itself into a different form in terms of slowing down vibration. So it's a process which we're involved in, and probably quite willingly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's about as far as I can go today. So look, it's wonderful having you on the show, and I'm definitely going to get you back on there so we can continue on down this path of basically going through your experiences still, and like how you've gone about with this shamanism, because shamanism is very interesting in my perspective, because obviously, you know, it's something that's been in the world for centuries in society, or not society, but, you know, like in human civilizations, you know, there's some sort of shamanism or spiritual awareness, you know, which is interesting, like, and we're still we're uncovering that in today's world, and that's what we sort of need to get an idea of. So I'd love to get you back on the show, talk more deeper onto this whole shamanism thing and your experiences, if you're willing. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love it too. It's always fun to talk about this stuff. So I'd love to come back. Thanks, Anthony.
No, look, thank you very much, Lee. It's great having you on. All right, talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. And that will do it, folks, for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the show. And don't forget, if you or someone you know has had an encounter, please get in touch with me to be featured on the podcast. If you're a fan of the show, you can support the podcast by purchasing some awesome merchandise that's available on our online store via the link provided in the episode description. So thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next Encounter Down Under. Hooroo!